If you were here a few weeks ago, you might have seen this short clip.
This is my city. These are my people. I've seen a lot of things in this town. Things I don't like. Bad people taking advantage of the weak. Good people down on their luck. Innocent people suffer. Talk to God a lot. Sometimes he talks back. So I ask him, when are you going to do something about all this? You know what his answer was? You wouldn't believe me if I told you. My name is Habakkuk. This is my story.
Ago, Scott started a 3-week series in Habakkuk. And when he and I realized that we're going to be speaking back to back because he will be joining you next week. My husband is with our 15-year-old son up in the high Sierras. Today is their first day of a fishing extravaganza that they get to do every year, that father-son bonding. So next week he'll be coming to wrap up this series. And why is it 3 weeks? Because Habakkuk is only 3 chapters long. So last time, Scott shared that Habakkuk had a few problems with God. I was at the gym on a Stairmaster machine as I was reading Habakkuk, and I thought, this is a depressing book of the Bible. Really, Scott? We're going to speak on this? And yet we can learn some very important things. Habakkuk was a guy who questioned God. And last time, Scott shared 3 big questions that Habakkuk wrestled with in chapter 1. And that was, God, do you even care? And God, are you going to do anything? Even though you can do something, are you going to do anything? And finally, God, why are you not fair? And really, chapter 1 is about being able to say that, hey, we can have faith in a God who's huge, and yet we can also struggle. Habakkuk actually means to wrestle. That was his name. And he was a minor prophet who was there to tell the people what God said, but he didn't like what God was saying. And so today, we're going to continue to look at chapter 2. When in that point of all of Habakkuk's questionings, he looks at what we might call the dip. Habakkuk in verse 1, I love how the Message says it. It says, what's God going to say to my questions? I'm braced for the worst. I'll climb to the lookout tower and scan the horizon. I'll wait to see what God says and how he'll answer my complaint. You see, Habakkuk noticed, I don't like what I see. This doesn't make sense. Have you ever been at that place in your life? Have you ever experienced a moment when you just don't understand? It's not fair. You seem like God is far away. Thursday morning, I got a text from Brandy saying, got your PowerPoint. It finally went through because we had some issues the last time because I'm not very technologically smart. And then to hear on Friday that she was in the hospital all day on Thursday, God, where are you? Why do you allow things to happen? You see, there's a book written by a guy named Seth Golden, and it's called The Dip. And really, in that book, it talks about those down times in our life. Last time we looked at the dip as really facing a crisis of belief. And it's this little chart, I know it's not on the screen right now, but kind of goes like this. And it's that moment when we stop and say, I don't get it. Now, there's many reasons for a dip in our lives. Sometimes it's circumstances. Hard things come into our lives or in our family members' lives. Sometimes we're just questioning our faith. You know, we might have been kind of going along, maybe having a faith for years and years and years, or maybe just a few years, and then something happens and we kind of start to say, is this real? Is this really true, God? I'm not sure. Or maybe we just faced something tragic or a death, and God seems far. And we go through that dip in our lives. Oftentimes when we face that dip, we can have one of four reactions. And it's very similar to the grief cycle. Number one, we might want to deny it. Scott shared a little bit about this. Like, oh, it's just not happening. I'm really, everything's just going to be okay. When maybe it's not. Or maybe we just get angry. God, how dare you? I want nothing to do with you. If you allowed this, you can't be that loving God. Or maybe we just fall into a pit of sadness. And it's like we just can't climb out. Or anxiety grips our hearts. And finally, hopefully we can get to some acceptance where we go, okay, this has happened. This is rough. But it's not going to stay this way. Because life is a series of dips. Last November, Scott and I had some friends of ours, longtime friends, way back from one of our first ministries. And they had their 12-year-old son tragically die on his way home from school. He was at the stop sign waiting for the light to turn green so he and his sister could get on their bikes and go across the street just like you're supposed to. The light turned green. They got on their bikes to go across the street. And somebody turned left, and it was that blinding light, and didn't see him and ran right into him. And by that evening, he was dead. And Nikki and Steve faced a dip. And they wrestled with God. And yet, one of the things I learned in this young couple who still had 3 younger children, that their faith actually grew. And they clung to Jesus in the midst of that dip versus running from him. And yet, they don't have the answers. They mourn and they grieve. What about you? What have the dips been in your life? Because if you're not in one right now, guess what? There's probably one coming. I was looking, because one of the points we're going to talk a little bit about writing, and so I was going back and looking at some of my old journals. And I found November 4th, 2014. It was one of the only times I was my schedule allowed me to be a part of one of the World Zone gatherings for DCPI, Dynamic Church Planting, which, thank you, because we are one of your missionaries, and you support DCPI on a weekly basis, so thank you. But I was at this meeting, and I spent some time with the Lord, and I shared about the roller coaster, the dips that we face. Life seems to move at such a fast pace. I blink, and my children are no longer 4, 7, and 9. They're now 12, 15, and 17. They're now 15, 19, and my 19-year-old's here, and almost 21. Time shifts through the hourglass so quickly, and yet some things in my life seem like nothing has changed. And this is kind of true for 2018. I still long for balance. I still struggle with feelings of depression, overwhelmment, stress of time and finances, and struggles with organization and time management. Yes, I arrived at 10:01 this morning. When will my personal crazy life become more like a sailing ship than a hamster's wheel? I know you have me on the roller coaster of life, and you know the twists and the turns, the highs and the lows that await me. How long will it continue? How I long to put my hands up and simply enjoy the ride you have set forth for me. Let me let loose of the desire to hold on to comfort, pry my hands off the safety bar, and let me stop trying to look beyond the next turn. That kind of sums up the dips of my life. And they keep coming. I want you just to take a quick moment to think about you. What's a dip that maybe recently you faced or you're in the midst of right now? I want to pray for us. Jesus, I thank you that you are here. You know our questions. You know our challenging circumstances. You know the things that break our hearts and the things that just tick us off. You know where each one of us is this morning as we walk in here. And Lord, I pray that we would experience your wisdom this morning as we look into chapter 2 of Habakkuk. In your name.
So I went to a rooftop where I could see the whole city. And I waited for God to answer my question. Get a pencil and write this down, he said. Because when you hear what I have to say, you're going to want to tell everybody.
So chapter 2, we're going to dive into that, and really we're just going to look at the first 4 verses. Because the rest is a lot still. After he kind of gets this wisdom from God, Habakkuk then goes and struggles and gets angry and gets focused on the other stuff, which I think so often we can do in the midst of those questions that we have. So what do we do when we are in the dip of our life? Well, there's 3 things we can look at this morning that we can do. And the first one is that we need to stop. Everybody take a breath. And we need to listen. So often, I am one who, in the midst of anxiety and life and the rat race, I just keep going and going and going. And I can't tell you how many times in my life I have heard my husband say, "Kathy, just stop." I don't do that very well. What about you? You see, we cannot listen if we don't stop. If we don't actually take an active stance, we can't actively listen. Habakkuk says, "I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts." He goes to take watch in a very active way, being completely alert. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give this complaint. We have some good friends, and their son has recently joined the Navy. And he was out training on the other side of the nation, and then they brought their sub back in. And it was just so exciting, and he was telling his parents he just loved what he did. Well, they came back into port, and they're out in Coronado. And his job isn't as exciting now, because he gets the shift from 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. to stand on the submarine and watch. Now out in Coronado, praise God, right now it's a pretty peaceful time for the Navy in Coronado. Not a lot to watch for. If he falls asleep on watch, he's going to be in big trouble. And that's what I picture Habakkuk doing. Going to his tower, to his station, and simply waiting for God. Listening needs to be active. Listening means we have to stop our thoughts. This is the hardest part of listening, especially for me with listening to God. Because oftentimes I'm tired and then I kind of end up saying, "Speak to me in my dreams." Because if I just stop and stay quiet and try to turn my brain off, it's hard for me to stay awake. Does anybody else have that issue? Or is it just me? But really being able to say, "Lord, what is it that you want to say?" Why is listening hard? Anybody want to share why can listening to God be hard? Like, this is a chance to actually share an idea. You're doing great at listening. Well, I'll tell you why I think that it's a little bit different. I think, one, because we don't actually hear anything. right? I'll have friends who don't believe in God, and they'll say, what do you mean listen to God? What, do you hear this audible voice? Well, I don't. But I do know some people who have truly heard an audible voice. My dad being one of them. He was on a retreat. And he heard from God. He heard an audible voice. In fact, he looked around to see if anybody was there, and a wolf ran off. So who knows if God came or an angel came in the form of a wolf, but thank goodness it didn't eat my dad. But he heard an audible voice. I've never heard an audible voice. So sometimes I think listening to God's hard because we don't know, is it you, God? Are you really telling me this? Sometimes I hear it in my spirit. You know what I mean? I have this thought that comes in, and I think, oh, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten out of my car in that rat race of life, and I've heard, check the car. And I haven't. And I've shut the door, and my keys were locked in the door. I think, darn, I believe that was the Holy Spirit. He cares about me locking my keys in the car, but I didn't listen. So, audibly God speaks, but he definitely speaks through his word. And so if you want to listen, I challenge you first to spend time in quiet. Maybe asking the Lord, but sitting. And then go to his word. As we read his word weekly, daily, we're going to have him speak to us through the Bible. It says the Bible is living. It's alive. And I don't know about you, but I can read one verse and it can speak to me 20 years ago, and it can tell me a whole different message last week. But God also speaks through circumstances. Sometimes he can speak in positive ways through circumstances, and sometimes we hear the answer no through circumstances. And finally, he speaks through other godly people. God will use people in your life, and that's the blessing of the chapel. So, we need to stop and listen. This week, how are you going to build that into your schedule? When is your time? In the midst of whatever you're facing, grocery shopping, getting ready for a trip, going to see family, making sure you paid the bills. How do you take time to hear what God wants for you? And the second one is we need to write it down. How many of you write notes to yourself? Like you have sticky notes or thought comes into your brain and you're like, I'm going to forget that if I don't put it down. My mother was known, I think she must have had stock in sticky notes because she had them everywhere. Especially, where do you think would be a number one place that we look? The refrigerator. And the other one, the bathroom mirror. My goodness, my mom's bathroom mirror, it became like she had this little hole for her face and sticky notes everywhere else. And I hated those things. If I woke up as a teenager and saw sticky notes on my mirror, I wasn't always in the happiest mood. You know, I've taken my mom's trait, though, and now when I'm at work and somebody will say something, my principal at the school I work at, he keeps a notebook, and so he'll jot it down. I keep sticky notes. And then I will stick them onto my computer because I go between two different schools, and I'm afraid I might forget the notebook because remember that organization piece 14 years ago, and then 4 years ago, and then last week that I have. So then I will peel off the sticky note when I finish it. Oh, what a burden. Right? Such relief. Well, writing things down is important. Habakkuk verse 2 says, Then the Lord replied, Write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets, so that the herald may run with it. Write it down. When it comes to what God says to you, do you have it anywhere? You know, as a therapist, I oftentimes will encourage people to journal. Not that I do it myself. But journaling, why? Because number one, we just need to get thoughts that are spewing around and around and around in our head. We just need to dump them somewhere. And sometimes just being able to put them down, I will tell people when they are in conflict with one another, especially younger couples, they seem to journal with their thumbs. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
The problem is they journal in a section of a text and they just go at it with their thumbs and then they push send, which they should never have done. And so I always encourage in this day and age of smartphones, if you've got to just spit something out, spit it into the note section and then delete it, right? I mean, honestly, in this day and age, our phones can become our personal journal as well. If you're in the car driving and you hear God speak, put it down. I can't tell you how many apps there are for different types of journaling. But I just like the little notepad because I know where it is all the time. So we need to just spit thoughts out. But why do we need to spit thoughts out? Because we need to see it. And we need to remember. I mean, that's what my sticky notes are for, right? But I find that my journals, when I have done it, and that's not very often in my life, but I love going back and reading them. And this week I took some time to scrounge up. I've had 8 journals in my life. I've only written in 4 of them. I have never completed a journal. My journals look kind of like this. I started journaling my freshman year in college. In fact, my roommate in college gave me this journal and said, Kathy, sometimes it helps to write things down. She didn't know the Lord, but she knew the importance of journaling. It helped me, and I hope it helps you. And the beginning, I was strong. In fact, I went all the way through March, almost every day writing, just a little bit. But that was because I took an Old Testament class, and I had to journal for a grade. And then my journaling stopped. And then it says, beginning again, a year later. And I made it through a whole 1 page, 2 entries, 3 entries, and then it says, a new chapter in life, 14 years later. But the good news was, in between that 14 years, I started 2 other journals. But they kind of looked very similar to this. Because I'm not good at always writing it down. But Habakkuk learned from God the power of writing it down. And you know what? Thank goodness he did. Because we can now read his journal. We can now, hundreds, thousands years later, read the words that God said to him. And it was God who said, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that the herald may run with it. I don't know how or what time or when is best for each of you to journal, because obviously I'm still trying to figure it out. But I will say that this last week, I read about so many dips in my life that I had completely forgotten about. Completely forgot about our first youth ministry, Eileen Stites. Godly woman, but boy, she was a thorn in Scott's and my flesh at one point. I remember we were new youth pastors. We had just gotten a mortgage. We were trying to figure out, we were both doing 2 jobs and going to graduate school, trying to figure out how to be in this rat race. And I remember she stood in a meeting and accused us of not working hard enough. We were only working 55 to 60 hours a week in a part-time job that they had hired us part-time. And if we're paying you this amount of money, how dare we don't get our money's worth out of you? Oh, I completely forgot about that. In fact, as I read it in my journal, it was kind of a good thing that I forgot about it. But I saw what God did with that and how God used it and God shaped us and built character and just really prepared us for a whole lot worse things that were going to happen in the ministries that we were going to face. Well, the third thing that we need to do, and again, for a person like me, it's not easy, is we need to wait for the Lord's answer. How many of you struggle with waiting? Am I the only one? I'm glad I'm not the only one. Welcome, impatient people of the world. You know, it's interesting and it's very ironic in my life because I do make people wait for me. In fact, it has become a thing that has developed a lot of patience in my husband. And yet for myself, Jacob Scott, if you are not in the car when I am ready, then I'm out of here. And thank goodness God is not like that. But God also calls us sometimes to wait. He's not a God always of fast answers. Habakkuk cried out a whole chapter's worth of questions. And God's answer was this, verse 3. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. Wait for it, Habakkuk. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. You know, that last phrase, will not delay, is so confusing at different points in our life, isn't it? Because we feel like God has delayed forever. When are we finally going to get that answer? I know Steve prayed for years and years for his mother to come to know the Lord. And he waited till how old, Steve? 91? 90? 89? 99. Holy mackerel. And that wasn't delaying God? Oh my goodness. You know, I was so excited to have a child. When Scott and I got married, I was young, and I knew we wanted to wait. And about 4 years into our marriage, we thought, okay, now it's time. And we waited. And we waited. And we started to wait to the point when I had a lot of tearful months. And finally, we decided, okay, we're going to need to just make an appointment and go look at the fertility specialist. So we had the appointment on the books for January. And I knew there was one more shot. And all of a sudden, I was stressed in life, and I was thinking, and something wasn't happening that was supposed to happen, and I thought, maybe God, is it? So I waited another week just before I would take a test to determine the course of our lives. And the test came up negative. And I'll never forget my response of just breaking down on my knees and crying and shouting out to God. And I was so angry with him. 5.5 years, God, really? And I remember I got in the shower and I'm in tears, but I started to hear, wait for me. Wait for me. And I started to think of the song, I waited on the Lord Most High, and he heard my cry. And I got out of the shower and I thought, hey, I waited another 5 minutes. And so I went and I got my test out of the trash can and I looked at it, and 2 lines. 2 lines. And Caitlin Sue was conceived. Well, she was conceived before that test. But, you know, and I should have known that that child was going to make me wait. She was 8 days late, and she has followed in her mother's footsteps ever since. Kelsey and I, after church today, we're going to have to kind of bolt out of here because we're going to be driving up to Glendale, where Caitlin now lives. She works at 4 p.m., so we're going to try to shoot for 2 p.m. Hopefully by 3 p.m. we'll be together and get an hour with her. But waiting is hard, right? You know, over and over in the Psalms, God tells us to wait. The psalmist hears this from the Lord. Psalm 33:20, we wait in hope for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. Psalm 38:15, Lord, I wait for you. You will answer. Lord, you are my God. Psalm 40, verse 1, my verse. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and he heard my cry. Psalm 119:84, how long must your servant wait? When will you punish my persecutors? You ever been in a situation that you just feel, why are these people so hard around me? Psalm 119, verse 166, I wait for your salvation, Lord, and I followed your commands. Tuesday night, got to go to Disneyland to meet up with Garrett Harper. Garrett was in our youth ministry way back when Eileen Stites was in our youth ministry. Garrett's now a dad of 2 preteen boys. And he was going to be flying to a baseball tournament with his boys, but Garrett sometimes can struggle with anxiety. And we were there and he said, you know, Kathy, I have the craziest now stress. I'm just doubting my salvation. I don't know why. Garrett accepted Christ when he was a young child. He's gone through different dips in his life, but he said, I just can't get out of my head that what if this whole stuff is not true? What if the Bible is just false? I mean, there's so much going on around the world that tells us that it's wrong. There's so much education that today is pointing completely away. So how do we know that the Bible's true? And I said, you know what, Garrett? I got to tell you, yeah, we can look back at the doctrines that have been uncovered and how they match up, and we can look at science, but there are days when I think, I don't know if it's true, but bottom line, if the Bible is false, and I were to die today, I'll be in a grave, or ground, or actually I'll probably be burned, and then hopefully my family will take me out to sea. But I'll be done, and I won't know any different. And so even if it's false and nothing else happens after this life, I am thankful for what I've learned in Scripture because it's given me hope. And I sense God's presence. And so if in that 0.2% that I question and doubt, I have nothing to lose. But if the Bible's true, I have a lot more to gain. Amen. Because if the Bible's true, and if there is life after death, and if it's true that there's only one of 2 places you're going, I want Jesus. And Garrett said, I never thought of it that way. I said, well, it's just a perspective. Take it or leave it. You see, I wait for your salvation. So why wait? Last final points. Because it develops patience. It develops character in us. God's never late. He doesn't delay, though it might seem on our time frame. It's really slow. It develops our character. It develops our faith. In verse 4 of Habakkuk 2, he says, see, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright. This is what God is saying to him. But the righteous person will live by faith, by his faithfulness. Faithfulness in God. And so when we wait, our faith grows if we keep looking to the Lord. And then we know from James that our faith will develop perseverance to get us through this dip and the next dip and every dip in between until God takes us home. James 1:2-6, I just want to close with this. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, or this morning as we could say, whenever you face the dip. Because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt. Question, yes. We can question all day long. But at the end of the day, we choose between faith or doubt. Because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. Let me pray for us. Jesus, I thank you. Because I know you're real. 99.9999. I know that you are alive and well and moving and speaking. That you are a God of action. Not a God who stays hidden. But so often we don't want to look for you. We really don't want to listen. And sometimes we don't want to do what you ask us to do. Especially when we are facing the dips in life. Those crises of beliefs when we can say, God, where are you? Do you even care? Why isn't this fair? But Lord, would we hear the words that you gave Habakkuk this morning? To stand at the tower and watch and listen. To write down your words. So we can take action and remember. And to wait. That though sometimes you might feel like you are lingering, that you do not delay. Go with us this morning. Help us experience the joy of the trials and struggles in life. And the joy and the hope of the blessings. In your name, amen.
Amen.